Hey, what's up, y'all? My name is Devontae, and I sacrificed my time so you don't have to. Currently, at the moment, it is 3:52. I just got finished watching the first episode of the Vince McMahon documentary series on Netflix, and I gotta say, the first episode, not as compelling, not as appealing, at least to me. I think for most casual fans, they might find this appealing just from the standpoint if you don't know too much about Vince McMahon. I hope it gets a little bit better as we go down the docuseries, but the first episode, it was definitely very boring. Very, very boring. But again, I think that has more to do with the fact that I'm already very aware of Vince McMahon and his early life. I'm very aware of everything in regards to WrestleMania 1. I'm very aware of the John Stossel situation. I'm very aware of all the stuff that was happening with Richard Belzer. And I'm pretty sure most of you guys are aware too. But just to be a little bit more consistent, let's talk about it from the beginning, right? Again, I think there was maybe one or two things that they kind of talked about that I wasn't too wary of, but here they talk about his upbringing. They talk about how he grew up in North Carolina, how for the most part he was trailer park trash, how he didn't know his dad, how his dad came and essentially, introduced him to the business. But while introducing him to the business, he was never one to show compassion. He was never one to show love to Vince McMahon. And Vince McMahon recalled one time how he ran up to his dad in order to give him a hug. And instead, his dad kind of pat him on the back, pat him on the chest, you know what I mean? And quite frankly, all they really talked about was the wrestling business. And one can maybe make an argument because it wasn't just that. It was Vince McMahon also. His stepfather used to beat the dog shit out of him, and his mom for that matter too. I don't think they mentioned his mom. I'm throwing it out there. He used to beat the crap out of his mom a lot too, from what I understand. And, with both of those things happening, for the most part, Vince is kind of a child of a single parent home. And his stepfather beating the crap out of him, his dad not really showing him any compassion. I think that has to be an origin in regards to how, Vince became such a hardened person, became such a womanizer, became the kind of person to do the things that he's been alleged to do, which hopefully we'll get into as the seasons start to go a little bit more further, or I guess the episodes. But as it starts to go on, Vince trying to get himself into the business, he'll beg his dad, please Pop, let me get into the business. What can I do to work for you? He desperately wanted to be into the wrestling business. So his dad sent to the Bangor, Maine. I didn't even know there was a city called Bangor, Maine. Honestly, I don't know anything out of Augusta, Maine, to be perfectly honest with you. I'm pretty sure I probably said that wrong. But he sent them over there to go work a territory, right? And when he went over there, essentially, he was just doing some random miscellaneous stuff. So eventually, one of Vince Sr., that is, one of his announcers was complaining about pay, and now he wasn't going to go out there and work unless he was paid a little bit more money than what he was currently being paid. Vince Sr. released him from his duties, and essentially, well, he didn't necessarily release him. He said he wasn't going to pay him, and then the announcer quit. Only for Vince McMahon Jr. to ask his dad, what are you going to do, Pops? We're kind of stuck in a situation right now. And Vince McMahon Sr., he had a roll of quarters in his hand, which he was known for having. I mean, Vince tells that story, but I'm pretty sure most wrestling fans know that already about Vince Sr. and his take of having a bunch of quarters in his hand. He told him that Vince Jr. was going to work the commentary stuff, right? And that's what he did. He worked the commentary deal, and he did the best that he could. I mean, most people will say that he sucked, at least in his early commentator role. And eventually it did get to a point while he was doing this stuff, he was doing other miscellaneous stuff. I don't think they talked about this in the documentary, or at least I missed it. But I know at least around this time, Vince was kind of doing other stuff like running concerts or just different deals as a promoter in order to save up a bunch of money or save up enough money, because around this time also he was going through hardship. He'll get his car repossessed. I know they tried to foreclose on one of his homes. They would do stuff like that. I even heard once how that Vince McMahon did go on food stamps for a while. So it's not as if it wasn't like he was spoon fed, as everybody likes to say when it comes to his dad. Nah, Vince had to struggle. Vince really, really had to struggle, to the extent that Gorilla Monsoon, this I never knew. This is one of those things that I never knew. Apparently, Gorilla Monsoon was the heir apparent to Vince Sr.'s company. and he wanted to sell the company to Gorilla Monsoon. Vince Jr., on the other hand, he talked to his dad and he was telling him, hey, Pops, what if I were to pay you in installments? So I'll give you a check here, I'll give you a check here, I'll give you a check here. We'll agree on the arrangement, and if I were to miss any payments, you can keep all the money and you don't even have to sell me the company. Which his dad was cool with, and also the investors in the company, which apparently Vince Jr., he ended up accomplishing, and he ended up keeping up his end of the deal, which surprised Vince Sr. And to be quite frank, at least listen to what Vince Jr. is saying, he doesn't believe that his father wanted him to buy the company, because Vince Jr. had a direction as to where he wanted the company to go, which obviously was sports entertainment. And then Vince Sr., he wanted to stay in the territory. He wanted to run the company as a wrestling company. You know, he didn't want it to ruffle any feathers. He was cool with all the other promoters. He figured he does his thing over here, they do their thing over here. Everything is peachy keen, and there should be no problems. Everything is copacetic. Until it got to a point in time, and mind you, Vince was constantly badgering his father, very similar to how Shane McMahon would constantly badger Vince McMahon about doing different things like buying the, UFC, or constantly trying to get him to buy ECW and stuff like that. Vince Jr. did the same thing to his dad in regards to trying to get him to cut corners and, hey, we should probably start going towards this direction, and we should probably start competing against other people in different territories. We should probably stop focusing so much on the wrestling and focus more on the star aspect of it, which Vince Sr., as he said, was very opposed to all that, until Vince bought the company. And then now inevitably Vince Sr. works for Vince Jr., and he had to watch him go into everybody's territory, take everybody's main stars, take everybody's essentially their audience for the most part, right? Not all people, they didn't say this in the documentary, but not all people were like, cool with that. They were very hesitant. Like, I know the people in Georgia, for an example, that's where the Briscoes sold their share to Vince McMahon. They didn't talk about this in the documentary, but I know they did not like the WWF airing their programming in the same spot as Georgia Championship Wrestling. They were expecting a certain product, and then when they seen like WWF doing reruns and syndication of what the hell they had going on, I don't think it was in syndication. I think they were just doing actual reruns. They completely dismissed it, and they didn't like it. They didn't talk about that in the documentary, but I figure that's a little something you should probably know if you didn't know. But nevertheless, though, that's what Vince was doing. He was hell-bent on putting all the promoters out of business. He was very, very focused, very, very driven. And he succeeded. I'm pretty sure they're going to go a little bit more further into that as the episodes start to get a little bit more deeper, probably in the second episode. But yeah, that was Vince's motto. I'm going to compete against you, and I'm not going to pull any strings, and I'm going to come at you really, really hard. If you don't want to compete, well, I guess then that's just you. Survival of the fittest. I'm a predator and you look like a tasty prey, and I'm gonna take you out. This essentially was Vince's, motive as far as going further. And Eric Bischoff and Bret Hart, they would talk about all the buyouts that he was doing with certain superstars in particular, and taking their top talent from every goddamn region known to mankind. And none of the, promoters were too cool with that. I mean, one phrase that Vince McMahon used was something along the lines of them saying consistently that they were going to take him out back or send him in the water to the fishes, or he was going to sleep with the fishes, I think is what he said, to be in particular, right? But Vince didn't care. He kept going forward. One of the things that he also did too that his dad didn't like was he replaced his top talent. So Vince Sr. was very much enamored with Bob Backlund, All-American, pumpkin pie, whatever, apple pie, whatever's the symbolic nature of America. He wanted him to be the top guy for his promotion, whereas Vince Jr. looked at Bob Backlund and he was kind of like, he's bland, he's vanilla, he's boring, and I kind of want someone a little bit more special in that spot, right? And I didn't know this either. Apparently, he didn't initially go directly to Hulk Hogan after the Rocky stuff. No. He actually went to Dusty Rhodes first. He wanted Dusty to be the person to lead the company for him because of how charismatic he was. But Dusty turned it down, felt like it was way too much on his plate. Didn't really have, I mean, in reality, I think it was more so the fact that Dusty, being in the Southern Territories and seeing how the promoters were reacting to Vince, not knowing how big of a success WWE was going to be, he probably just looked at it like, well, I'm not really sure how big your company's going to be. I'm not really sure of your vision, and I don't want to rock the boat with what I have going on right here. These promoters hate you. I don't want to work for you when they hate you. So I'm just going to turn that down. It's how I personally see how Dusty was reacting to the entire situation. But nevertheless, though, Vince McMahon, he eventually did settle on Hulk Hogan after seeing the Rocky movie. At first his dad did fire Hulk Hogan, right? He didn't want to work with him because Hogan wanted to do the Rocky movie, and Vince's dad essentially told him, if you do that Rocky movie, I'm gonna fire you. And Hogan did it anyways, right? And eventually, because I know before he was even like this, I know he was hired by Vince's dad, and he was initially gonna go by Sterling Golding. That's something else I didn't know also, before they decided on Hulk Hogan. But nevertheless, though, after Vince fired him and after the Rocky stuff, and then Vince paid his final installments and took over the company, he hired him back. Vince was like, I want you to be the guy who's going to lead the way of the future as far as what I want to get done. And they talked about, heel and babyface alignments, and they started to talk about the product in itself that we're all aware of. And eventually talked about the Hulk, about Iron Sheik taking the belt from Bob Backlund because you couldn't do face versus face, obviously, back in those days, which is hero versus hero for any casual fans. And eventually he got the belt from Iron Sheik, and it was pretty much off to the races, right? They had Dave Meltzer on here explain how, and this is one of the few times I actually agree with Dave Meltzer, how he explained how all the promoters were pretty much idiotic for deciding not to compete with Vince, especially after seeing the path as far as where they were going to go. And honestly, they did it to themselves. That part I absolutely agree with Meltzer on. He essentially said that the promoters just sat there and they just took it like bitches, and they just pretended as if, hey, well, I mean, he ain't gonna do any more damage than what he's doing right now. And you would think, because Vince McMahon was essentially going into a family-friendly oriented area, right? He was doing Tuesday Night Titans, he was on David Letterman. Clearly, he was starting the Rock and Wrestling connection, and that's when he linked up with Cyndi Lauper through the connections of Captain Lou Albano. And obviously all the other stuff, the rest is history. WrestleMania 1 was history. And obviously there was some, roadblocks. You had the whole stuff with John Stossel and David Schultz because, John Stossel was going around running his mouth, calling professional wrestling fake, saying this, saying that. And he tried to coax Hulk Hogan into coming on this show in order to grill him about how fake professional wrestling is. And, Hogan told Vince this, and Vince said out loud in the locker room he wished someone would take care of that guy, which David Schultz overheard, and we know what happened. He bitch slapped him multiple times in the face and told him, do you think professional wrestling is fake? Which I'm pretty sure John Stossel at that point shit his pants. And he probably thought to himself, is shitting my pants fake? I hope this is fake. And then they talked about the whole Richard Belzer stuff also, same routine as John Stossel. This one a little bit more comical because he got himself in a headlock from Hulk Hogan, who was going to show him, okay, you think the wrestling business is fake? Let me show you how fake the wrestling business is. And he put him in a chin lock, and, Richard Belzer, being the weakling that he is, went unconscious, and he fell backwards, and he hit his head on the back of the floor, which obviously busted his back of his head open. And they talk more and more about the success of WrestleMania 1 before they transition into the steroid trial stuff, which I'm assuming is going to come into episode 2. And they end it all off with talking about, how Richard Belzer and John Stossel were settling out of court. I think it was 1987 with John Stossel, and Richard Belzer was 1990 respectively. But that's essentially it for episode 1. Like I said, I don't think it was really that appealing, but obviously the beginning of the stories for any movie or for any television show, or if you read a book, is always going to be just something to give you a lot of context so you know the characters, so you can relate to them. So I thought it was a episode that did its job, but as far as it being compelling, not so much. But that's fine because we have episode 2 coming up next. Alright, now we're starting to get a hell of a lot more spicier. Granted, again, it's still information that I'm very much aware of, that I'm pretty sure some of you guys are very much aware of. Again, unless you're a casual audience member and you're just now strolling along professional wrestling. But they kick off this whole episode right here with Vince doing this whole little cringy stand back routine. I mean, I'm pretty sure you guys seen it 1,000,001 times. And they started to talk about Saturday night's main event and how it became, right? Because of the success of WrestleMania 1. And how all the wrestlers back in the days were on the road 7 days a week. They'd wrestle hurt if they weren't able to, because like back in the days, it's not like today's in professional wrestling where like, you know, obviously we have guaranteed contracts today. Back then they didn't have that. You know, it was pretty much you had a deal and you worked on that deal, and if you got hurt, you didn't get paid, right? We all know that to be the case. Well, with that being the situation, as you guys know, again, Jesse Ventura tried to start a union, and he tried to get all the wrestlers on board in order to pretty much protest. They said they wanted to protest WrestleMania 2, right? Unfortunately, Hulk Hogan heard about this, and he went to Vince, and he pretty much ratted Jesse out. And it was just like, you're seeing them do the interviews, and just how stoic, it's almost sociopathic. Because like, you know, you hear the stories about Hogan lying all the time about, oh, this, that, and the third. And Jesse Ventura, they don't say it in the video, but Jesse Ventura, he essentially had his lawyers ask Vince outright, like, okay, out of curiosity, who told you about the unionization? And then Vince just straight up said Hulk Hogan. And to just see Hogan so stoically look at the camera and just be like, yeah, I told on him. So I'm like, Hogan's such a piece of shit, bro. Like, I personally have my own reasons in regards to unionization. I don't believe it, you know, it work in professional wrestling, but that's besides the point. Your homie's gonna, because apparently they were friends. It's like your homie's trying to do something rather than you backing them up, you stabbed them in the back. And I get it. Hogan's whole perception is like, well, if they start a union, I'm going to be the first one taken out because I'm making the most money. They're going to use my money in order to spread amongst the wrestlers. I get the whole sentiment, but it's like, bro, Vince still needs to agree on this. And I guess, you know, if Hogan's not going to be a part of it, then they're not going to agree with it. For him to just rat out his homies like that is just such a piece of shit move, but very apropos for a Hulk Hogan, right? They talk about WrestleMania 2 and all the challenges it came with having to film it in each separate locations. And, you know, we all, again, information that we're very much aware of, but it's still nice to hear them talk about, right? They talk about Andre the Giant and how Vince met him on a movie set, because at that point in time, Andre was out of the wrestling business. He wanted to do his own thing. He wanted to reap the rewards of what he made within the business in itself. And Vince McMahon had an idea. WrestleMania 3 was coming up the following year, and he figured, I think if I try hard enough, I can get the biggest wrestling attendance of all time. And he pretty much, because at that time, Andre had a horrific back injury, and it was actually there for a while, right? And Vince convinced him. He was like, let me pay for your back surgery, and I want to present you with this idea of you turning heel and going up against Hogan at WrestleMania 3, which Andre agreed to, right? He did everything that Vince asked him to do until it got to the match in itself. And honestly, you would think Hogan is lying, but you have Vince in a separate room pretty much confirming Hogan's story. Hogan and Vince essentially say that by the time they got to the event, they both had no clue what Andre wanted to do. You know, was Andre going to be the one to allow Hogan to go over him, or was Andre going to make the rules? It was to the point where Hogan, when he sat next to Andre to go over the match, he called him boss. Like, all right, what are we doing tonight, boss man? Like he was over Vince or some shit. Not until they actually got in the ring, leave it up to Hogan, Andre called for the slam, right? And then Hogan did the slam, and he pinned him, and Andre allowed him to pin him. Outside of that, though, apparently Hogan and Vince had no clue. Vince pretty much told Hogan, well, we'll just hold our breath. You know, Andre's going to do the right thing. But that's to the extent of whether or not Andre was going to do the right thing or not, right? Now, obviously, as we know, the attendance, you know, it's always usually touted to be 93,000 fans. It's disputed. You got guys like Meltzer, who, by the way, just went on a complete tangent. He started to talk about how, in reality, Andre was slammed plenty of times before the WrestleMania 3 stuff. In reality, Andre lost a bunch of matches prior to this, because remember, with Hogan and Andre, they were promoting it like Andre was, undefeated. And one of the things that he also disputed, which he has done plenty of times, was the 93,000 record at WrestleMania 3. He claims it to be 78,000 fans, which it is what it is. I mean, personally, I don't care. I've never been the person to care about the attendance. All I see at WrestleMania is a sea of fucking fans, and that right there is good enough for me. That's just my perspective, though. But with all that stuff that happened at WrestleMania 3, Hulkamania just fucking went wild. Like, it was already there, and then it just kicked into high gear after WrestleMania 3. It was ridiculous. To the extent that they were opening up new pay-per-views, they were giving you new specials. It was crazy. It was really, really fucking crazy. Eventually, though, they started to talk about how, and I never knew this, to be honest with you, this is actually kind of crazy. Apparently, Hogan, when he was talking and doing all the groundwork and promotional stuff and everything, Vince was the one feeding him all his lines. So eventually, or apparently, Vince was essentially his ghostwriter. All Hogan's promos, in order to promote something or do this or do that, Vince was the sole proprietor in regards to what Hogan was saying out there. Crazy, right? But eventually Hogan did want to go to Hollywood, and Vince was trying to talk him out of it, but Hogan was very insistent that he really wanted to see what he can do outside of professional wrestling, before Vince thought to himself, okay, what if we make a movie together? Hence No Holds Barred came into fruition, and obviously it fucking tanked. It was horrible. I've never seen the movie personally myself, so I can't really speak upon it, but financially speaking, it was absolutely fucking tanked, and it was just, it was bad. Eventually, though, as time starts to go on, we get to a point in time where Hogan is starting to get much older, and Vince wanted to replace Hogan, right? And he thought to himself, let me replace him with the Ultimate Warrior. Excuse me, guys, it's late at night right now. Well, they did replace him with the Ultimate Warrior, but as stated plenty of times in the past, as you guys know at the time, Warrior was not what you would call a team player, right? Warrior did not like the wrestling business. He didn't understand the wrestling business. He had an attitude problem consistently, and he simply just wasn't the draw, or at least not to the degree of Hulk Hogan. So they thought to themselves, okay, have him drop the belt to Sergeant Slaughter, and then we'll have Hogan take the belt from Sergeant Slaughter. We'll do Iron Sheik and Bob Backlund all over again, essentially, right? Well, they attempted to do this with Sergeant Slaughter. Unfortunately, the whole gimmick was surrounding him being an Iraqi sympathizer at the exact same time the United States went and they did the whole Desert Storm stuff. I think in Kuwait or Iraq. I think it was in Iraq. They did the whole Desert Storm stuff in 91. Which obviously, because it's like, 1991 and it's not 2024, half the country specifically doesn't love the United States and half the other country doesn't. No, us as a country back then actually loved our country, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. Nevertheless, though, apparently the consequences was them berating Sergeant Slaughter, going as far as to calling threats to his house and all this other kind of stuff. I'm happy that they didn't go the route of pretending as if this was the reason why they went to a different arena, because if you remember correctly, they were trying to promote this as, they're going to get like 110,000 people in the stadium or 100,000 people in the stadium. But then all of a sudden, they weren't selling nowhere near that amount of tickets. So they were like, Sergeant Slaughter, bomb threat, yada, yada, yada. Looks like we have to go to a smaller building, because consequences. It's such bullshit. But Hogan did get the belt back, right? And by this point in time, this is when the whole Dr. George Sahorian shit started to really, really kick off. So this is according to Vince McMahon. They talk about George Sahorian and how he was appointed by Pennsylvania State as a doctor for WWE to make sure their state regulations were being followed, where allegedly he was instead selling steroids, he was selling painkillers, he was selling sleeping pills to the talents. And this is according to Bret Hart. apparently he would just take your blood pressure and then take your pulse, and then you can outright ask him for prescriptions, like nothing else, and he would actually prescribe it to you. See, Vince said there's a loophole to this. If you were to just buy the drugs straight up, there wouldn't be a problem with this, but when he prescribes it to you for the specifics, when he prescribes it to you specifically just to sell it, that's when it becomes illegal. And Vince said, I bought it myself. I didn't really see any problem with it until it got illegal when Reagan started the whole war on drugs stuff back in the 1980s. But George was arrested by the government not too long after Vince started the Bodybuilding Federation. George apparently testified he treated Hulk for steroids. And, Vince had a test for steroids going forward after all that because of this guy, which is good, I guess, obviously. I mean, I still don't think, in professional wrestling, what's really the big deal for steroids? I mean, it's a big deal from a health standpoint. But, I mean, as far as it being illegal within professional wrestling, it's not a real sport. But apparently we have to pretend it is. Hulk did go on Arsenio Hall where he lied about not taking steroids and said he only took it like 3 times. And you had all these other wrestlers, telling reporters, no, I injected him. I seen his superstar Billy Graham. He was like, no, I injected him. Dr. David Schultz, he told him that he injected Hulk Hogan. And the whole thing was Vince told Hogan, when you go on Arsenio Hall, just tell them the truth. And Hogan decided to lie, and he got outed for his lie. This is when Phil Mushnick is introduced, right? And I think you guys maybe have heard that name through people like Jim Cornette, maybe. I know he's rented on him plenty of times on some of those 97 Raw Shoot interviews he used to do back in the days. But I'm pretty sure he talked about Phil Mushnick on the podcast too, so, you can probably go look that up. But he pretty much says, because this is a guy that was just writing so many hit pieces on WWE. He wanted to see them go out of business. He despised Vince. He despised the WWE. And he never really gave a legitimate reason. He just because they asked him why, and he would just go, oh, because he's a dirtbag. That's why I covered him, essentially, right? And Tony Atlas talks about how much they abused women. And he didn't separate himself. He said they, as in we, how much we abused women, right? He specifically kind of parlays into the whole Jimmy Snuka and Nancy Argentino stuff, where Jimmy Snuka, he obviously killed that girl. I mean, we can all sit here and pretend as if he didn't. It's pretty fucking obvious he killed her. And it doesn't say it in the documentary, but Vince had a suitcase and he went into the investigator's room or the detective's room and he paid them off. Walked back out without a briefcase, and he told Snuka to let's go. Snuka was like, what the hell? And Vince was like, let's go. And they took off. That was one of the things that Phil Mushnick talked about. He also exposed the Ringboy scandal. Yep, they talked about it, the Ringboy scandal. With Mel Phillips and Terry Garvin and Pat Patterson. They even got Tom Cole, the subject of the entire, catalyst of the Ringboy scandal. They got him to talk, and man, he was very descriptive. I'll tell you what. I'm not to do a cheap plug, but it is my video after all. If you want my more detailed analysis about that, I did do a whole Ringboy scandal video probably like 3 weeks ago. If you want to go check it out, I don't know. I think it's pretty good. I went into pretty good detail, but that's up to you. Vince tells Meltzer allegedly that Patterson, and this is just wild to hear because it's like, yeah, there was a point in time when Vince McMahon and Dave Meltzer legitimately had ongoing conversations about the everyday going-ons in professional wrestling, specifically the WWE. Vince tells Meltzer allegedly that Patterson was innocent and that he fired him initially because he thought there would be a gay witch hunt. Because like Mel Phillips and Terry Garvin, he fired them, and initially he did fire Pat Patterson, but considering Pat Patterson is his second right-hand man, he had to bring him back. He was nothing without Pat, essentially. But all the wrestlers, in particular Tony Atlas, he said that Pat Patterson touched his penis, just flat out. And he touched a lot of other people's penises and a lot of other people's private parts. He said he would, because one of the interviewers asked why wouldn't he go tell someone important like Vince, and he said he wouldn't tell because he was afraid of getting fired. Even laughed it off because the guy was like, I'm pretty sure Vince will understand, and Tony just laughed it off completely. He said Vince wasn't protecting Pat, but rather protected the business, just the biggest cope in the fucking world. They discussed the sex scandal on Phil Donahue also, which, once again, if you want to check out the Pat Patterson Ringboy scandal, I have the Phil Donahue segment in the intro with one of the guys who also alleges that Pat Patterson tried to hit on him too, or at least one of the three guys. Brett talks about the Rita Chatterton situation also, where there was this referee who apparently Vince forced to give him head, and when she wouldn't comply, he started to grab on her, take off her clothes, pull her on top of him, and he was like, oh, if you don't do any of this is according to Rita, then you won't get this $1 million contract, which was obviously coercion. But here's my thing about this whole situation. When questioned Vince on it, Vince, he said that it was untrue, as you would think anyone would say, right? When being accused of raping someone. But then Vince, for some inexplicable reason, he turns it around and he goes that even if it was true, the statute of limitations ran out. Which, if you're not familiar with statute of limitations, it's just a time frame as to whether or not you can go convict someone or indict someone on a charge or a case or something like that. He said the statute of limitations ran out. Why would you even say that? Just say you didn't do it. The fact that you even said statute of limitations means, I mean, at the very least, it's a cause for concern, no? But nevertheless, though, Phil Mushnick, he kept writing so much on this. He would write on this, he would write on the steroid trial, and he kept writing so much that apparently he became an FBI informant. And they tried to get Vince on conspiracy to defraud the government. Vince calls them bullies, which is fucking ironic, and he has like a lot of nerve, but you know, they tried to coerce him and apparently tried to get him to cop a plea deal and just to pay a fine, which I'm assuming is going to be a hefty fine, which Vince tells them they can go fuck themselves. And this is around the time when Vince had the surgery on his neck, so he's like walking around the neck brace on his neck. And apparently a lot of people were thinking to themselves that Vince was only doing this just to get sympathy from the audience, to get sympathy from the jurors in order to try to get out of the conviction. You know, which is just fucking crazy when you really think about it. But just think about this. All this stuff is piling on. You got the steroid trial going on. You got the Rita Chatterton situation going on. You got the situation with Pat Patterson and all that stuff going on. And even though it's not all happening at once, it's like one situation will happen, then another situation will happen, then another situation will happen. Unfortunately, this situation that happened alongside the steroid trial was Ted Turner pretty much dumping a lot of money into WCW and making Eric Bischoff. It's I don't know if he made her the chairman or the vice president or something like that of WCW, but apparently because of all this stuff going on, Hulk Hogan, he withdrew himself from, you know, WWE. He didn't want to be a part of this anymore. He says that he used to get signs that would tell him, hey, would you shoot me up? And it's like a picture of us, a picture of a fucking syringe, which Hogan looked at that like, okay, it's time for me to go. And the problem with this is that Hogan told Vince that he would never compete against him. I never knew that. But yeah, Hogan straight up said that he was never going to compete against Vince. That was one of the stipulations as to how he got out of his contract, how he got his release. Just to turn around and compete with Vince McMahon. You know, the story goes Eric Bischoff coincidentally met Hulk Hogan on the stage of, I think it was Thunder in Paradise on the Disney MGM studios that they used to wrestle outdoors all the time on Nitro. And he got him to essentially agree on the deal. But like I said, the problem with that is now that he's wrestling for WCW, he's no longer with WWE, meaning he's competing with Vince, which Vince apparently felt heartbroken over. He hated the fact that his guy that he made was not just stabbing him in the back, but he also understood in the end of the day that it's all about money and money talks. And if you don't have the money, we're not talking, right? And then the ending of the whole episode is them talking about how because Vince went out of his way to sue Rita Chatterton and sue Gerardo, where she was doing the interview on, just to be turned around. And like a year today, back in 2023, I actually covered this in one of my videos. Rita Chatterton won a lawsuit. It was I guess it was the same lawsuit stemming from the withdrawal back in 1994. She won. I can't remember how much money she won, but I covered that story last year. And that takes care of episode 3, essentially. I like this episode a lot. This episode was a hell of a lot more compelling. We got a lot more things out of it. We got a lot more things done. Again, felt a little bit too long for my liking. And even though there's a bunch of information that I've already heard of, it's still a hell of a lot better than that boring ass first episode. So, as always, we're marching along to episode 3. It's 5:26, folks. I am fucking tired. I do this for you, though. I do this for you. All right. Trucking along, man. Let's keep it going. Episode 3 just ended right now. Folks, it is 6:20. It's about to pour down raining. I just drank some coffee, but I'm still wide awake. I'm still concentrating, and I'm still focused. And boy, oh boy, this episode right here, it's not so much that it was a boring episode compared to the last episode. I think I like the last episode more because it felt like it was a little bit more informative. Whereas this one right here is just kind of going through the motions of essentially telling you the start of the Attitude Era and kind of giving you the precursor of the Monday Night Wars in 98. This one right here just felt like I've heard this story 1,000,001 times, right? They kicked it off by showing you, and this was on purpose because of what the episode was going to end it with. It kicks it off with Spider-Woman, the Fabulous Moolah, and Wendy Richter in the original Screwjob, where Wendy Richter, she decided that she didn't want to drop the women's championship belt, and Vince McMahon told Fabulous Moolah to go out there and to shoot a roll-up on her, which if you're a casual wrestling fan, a shoot roll-up or anything, and a shoot means real, and a roll-up is just amateur roll from a professional wrestler that ends in a pinfall, but it's a tight pinfall. But essentially, she got the pinfall on Wendy Richter, she cheated her out of the match, essentially, right? She even kicked out when the referee hit the 3 count, but you know, wrestling, it's predetermined, and if Vince McMahon asks for his championship belt back and you say no, well, shit like that has to happen. And we're going to get more into that towards the end of the episode. Just continuing on, though, Hogan backed up Vince McMahon regarding the steroid trial. Remember, we're stemming off of that from the last episode. All the wrestlers essentially did, though, as far as backing Vince and the steroid stuff. Because in reality, Vince McMahon never really told them to do steroids. That's the whole deal. Vince never told them to do steroids. The government went after Vince McMahon because they said that he sold steroids to the wrestlers and that he forced the wrestlers to do steroids, when in reality, he never did that. And sorry if you hear rain in the background, but hey, Florida, you know how it is, man. But Vince McMahon was kind of shocked by all that because it was like, well, Hogan just went to WCW not too long after this, and for him to actually stand up for Vince McMahon is actually crazy, right? But as it starts to go on, the trial did hurt the company. You had a bunch of employees leave. You know, you had the ratings. It did dip. The attendance, it fell. At this point in time in 1993, 94, 95, especially in 96 with the NWO, which we'll get to in a little bit, the whole company, as far as its business structure, was completely like retconned almost as far as the ideology of the company in regards to what it should be doing going forward, right? That was the whole deal with what happened after the steroid scandal. I think people put too much emphasis on the steroid scandal, and I think it has more to do with the fact, now it's not to say that the steroid scandal helped Vince McMahon. It certainly didn't help Vince McMahon, but at the same time, I think currently at that point in time, what WWE was doing in regards to the environment, in regards to having to engage with the culture, that's what they were really lacking in my opinion. I know people like to kind of like, you know, pretend as if this isn't the case. No, they weren't engaging with the culture. While you're still in that mindset from the late 80s, we're now in the mid 90s. You know what I mean? Like, you got people wearing untucked shirts and flannels and Timbs and Converses and backwards hats and, you know, all this shit. Tupac is all the rage. You know what I mean? You know, some of the we're now in post grunge, not even in grunge anymore, and you're still trying to do the whole fucking, you know, hokey pokey bullshit from the mid 80s. That's what I think. That's what I think eventually hurt WWE, and where WCW eventually decided to go to. You know, that's what really hurt them in my opinion. But nevertheless, though, their insert to all of this, right, was trying to find a replacement for Hulk Hogan, which is stupid because like I said, you need to go forward past the Hogan stuff. Hogan that's the 1980s. You need to differentiate yourself. You need to stick with the culture. You can't go back to the 80s, and that's what they were trying to do. And on top of that, it's Lex Luger. I mean, it could have been anybody. No one's going to replace Hulk Hogan. He's one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, if not the greatest wrestler of all time. One may say the greatest wrestler of all time overall. You're not going to replace that. As far as a box office draw, as far as appeal, it's just not going to happen. And thinking to yourself that you can just put another blonde, buff guy inside that spot who loves America, it just wasn't going to happen. And then you get Bret Hart, who they did, for the most part, go with. I mean, it was a team effort. It wasn't just Bret Hart. It was Bret Hart. It was Shawn Michaels. It was The Undertaker. At the time before they left, it was Diesel. It was Razor. But they like to pretend, or at least Bret likes to pretend, oh, you know, I was the guy that pulled the sword out of the rock. And he did lead the company for a while back in '82. Back in 83, back in 94, but let's not pretend as if this wasn't a team effort. And Bret was just acting like such a fucking mark on this episode, just constantly putting himself over to the point that it's getting annoying. And you see so many interviews with Bret doing shit like that, but it doesn't really hit you until you actually have to sit back and you haven't seen it for a couple of years. And now that you're an adult, you get to actually witness it straight up. And it's like, man, Bret just constantly having to put himself forward just got so fucking annoying after a while. He's talking about how, oh, you know, they started the new generation and how it had to be me to lead the company. It was just, and I love how as soon as he said that, Vince came on directly after Bret, and he was like, well, I mean, yeah, we chose them, but it's not as if he had a bunch of charisma or anything like that. And I love Bret. Bret's probably like my top 3 greatest wrestlers of all time. I mean, it's Jericho, it's Benoit, and it's probably Bret Hart. Maybe Kurt Angle and then Bret Hart. Maybe Kurt Angle. No, yeah, I would say that. And then after Bret would probably be Triple H. But it's not as if, like, you were put into a position to lead the company by yourself. You had help, but leave it to Bret, no. We'll get to Bret a little bit later on, though. They eventually talked about Ted Turner buying all WWE's talent and how Nitro started, and how Vince admitted that he was worried that all this was happening around him, especially in conflict with all the shit that was going on with the steroid trial. That was like right there in the midst of the whole Monday Night War stuff. If not right there, right before. But you got to think to yourself that there's got to be some cost or whatever because of the trials in themselves, right? Nevertheless, though, Lex Luger did show up to WCW, which apparently pissed off Vince McMahon, and it's just beyond hypocritical because it's like, Vince, and Eric talked about this in the show, it's like, that's so hypocritical. Vince, you spent the entire first episode of this documentary in particular, I'm not even going to say the years, just in this document in particular, you spent your entire time hoarding and raiding and pillaging almost everybody's fucking territory, getting some of the best talent from all these territories to bring it to your company. There are top talent somewhere probably in fucking bumfuck USA who's probably a lower mid-card who ran that territory. That's how much talent you're gobbling up, and you have the audacity to say that someone is doing it to you now and therefore it's bad. You gotta listen to the way he gaslights you too, because the producer says, hey Vince, just throwing it out there, don't you think what they did is exactly what you did back in the 1980s? And Vince is like, nah, it's not exactly what I did. No, it was strictly based off of competition. Ted Turner wanted to hurt us. And the guy's like, okay, I get what you're saying, but you still hurt those guys though. And Vince is like, no, see, silly Billy, you don't understand. What I say is not what I think. It's like Vince is, he's just gaslighting the shit out of everybody, bro. I swear to God. But as a response, Eric Bischoff, he would talk about screwing WWE by going live, and they usually did this like an hour because back in the days, Raw would come on say at 9 o'clock, and then Nitro will come on at 8 o'clock, right? And the way they used to do this, at least in my area, well, Eric would do shit like that where he would jump on and he would just like say the announcement for who won or who lost on Raw that night. And I don't even know that because I remember hearing my uncle just, laughing his ass off every time he's seen it back in the days. So WWE's answer to all this was the billionaire Ted skits, right? Which, unfortunately, because it was all a parody, just picking on Macho Man or the Nacho Man, the huckster, billionaire Ted. They were just fucking with him and just picking on him and all this shit. The only problem with all this and the burials and all this other shit was the fact that the head of the USA Network at the time was good friends with Ted Turner and his family, and she did not take too kind that Vince McMahon is airing something on her channel that's essentially picking on one of her good friends. So she made him take it down. It was strictly that. I mean, no loyalty at all. No loyalty. Just let WCW just railroad the shit out of you, right? Because someone's good friends with them in the upper echelon. Eventually, Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, they signed with WCW. And then we get the whole, because you have to talk about it. I mean, eventually, typically when talking about the Montreal Screwjob, it's typically, not all the time, but what presides it is the curtain call. Ooh, it's 1996 and no one thinks professional wrestling is fake. Woo! Let's give Triple H, the only person in this situation, consequences, not Shawn Michaels, like it should have been. Woo! Just, my God. Oh, it was so stupid. I get it. It's the professional wrestling, baby. It's all said and done. But just imagine anybody realistically who hasn't watched professional wrestling looking at someone doing the exact same thing that they're doing, but because they happen to be in a higher upper echelon position than you are currently at the moment, they're not going to get punished at all, but you certainly will. It's so fucking dog shit. I hated everything about the fucking curtain call, from the logic in regards to why people are getting mad at him for doing it as if we don't know that professional wrestling is fake, or the fact that Triple H was the only one to get consequences. It's so dog shit. I hate everything about that. The Outsiders eventually do make their way to WCW, and they're causing a bunch of havoc with Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. And apparently Vince McMahon wanted to sue over the IP. He thought, in particular, Razor Ramon was way too close to the Scott Hall character in WCW, and he didn't like the fact that these guys were essentially still in his IP, still in his intellectual property. I mean, it's trademarked because from my understanding, Scott Hall came up with the character, but I digress. Vince would bitch about this and having his company hurt. Again, it's just, he's doing more of the gaslighting bullshit as far as like, they're hurting me. I'm big and bad, but they're hurting me, which Eric calls this out, and I think it's perfect. He's like, dude, Vince McMahon just wanted the procession of him going after Ted Turner and look way bigger than what he is versus going after Eric Bischoff. I mean, what looks better as far as the story is considered? Billionaire Ted going against Widow Old Me, or Widow Old Me going against Eric Bischoff, of all fucking people. Not because of what he said, but because of his status and what it represents right now. It's just so dog shit. And then Vince, apparently he won, eventually we got the whole Bret Hart and HBK stuff. And Vince wanted to put Bret underneath a 20-year contract, which eventually he did do. He essentially did in 1996. The only problem with the 20-year contract is that Vince couldn't afford it, right? So he pointed out a loophole to Bret Hart where he could take advantage of in order to get more money out of someone like WCW, which Bret Hart did. And one of his last acts, because this is the Montreal Screwjob, it has to be talked about like once a fucking month, it feels like. But one of those deals where Bret Hart essentially had to drop the belt before Survivor Series, or at Survivor Series, to Shawn Michaels, which he initially was going to do, but Shawn Michaels said some disrespectful shit. Now Bret doesn't want to drop the belt to Shawn Michaels. Why does Shawn say disrespectful shit? Because it's Shawn Michaels and it's 1997 and he's the biggest dick in the fucking world. He will tell you that. But as you know, with the Montreal Screwjob, yada yada yada, he ties the wrong leg, shooting star, fucking sharpshooter, yada yada yada. Bret didn't tap out, Earl having to ring the bell, yada yada yada. He spits in Vince McMahon's face, yada yada yada. He breaks a bunch of equipment, yada yada yada. Eventually gets in the locker room, he hits Vince in the eye, yada yada yada. You hear the same shit all the fucking time in regards to the screw job. And look, I like this episode in the sense that like it carried the ball and it kept going, What I didn't like with the episode is that it's retreading water. Once again, let's focus on Vince. You know what I mean? These last 3 episodes, the second one was good. We got a lot of information out of that one. But this one right here, let's get back on track. You know, you're focusing on things like the Montreal Screwjob and all this other convoluted bullshit. And I get some people may not be aware of that who are watching the new documentary series. But I don't know, for people who have been watching this for over 30 years, it's just one of those things where it's like, if I can go one day without hearing about the fucking Montreal Screwjob at least one time, I think I can live a healthier life. So the episode in itself talked way too much about things that I'm, very, very familiar with. I want to hear more stuff that I'm not familiar with, if you will. Okay? All right. 4th episode. Let's keep it going. Still pushing, folks. All right, it is now 7:28. Technically speaking, like I told you guys last night, in about what is 7:28, we have one more hour, and technically I would have been awake for 24 hours. I would have been awake for 24 hours straight. But we gotta keep going, man. I got my coffee here for a reason, man. Oh, man. So the episode kicks off with Dr. Jerry Graham, and they're playing his character, right? Because the whole emphasis on this is to pretty much tell you this is who influenced the Mr. McMahon character, right? It was one particular thing that that Dr. Jerry Graham did that really caught Vince McMahon's attention. I mean, outside of Jerry Graham apparently driving like a fucking maniac and damn near killing him at Vince, and Vince thinking it's cool, the peacock walk that Jerry Graham did, you can clearly see that Vince McMahon tried to emulate. So that's how they kicked off the episode, right? And then they go directly into the 83-week stuff, right? They start talking about how after the Montreal Screwjob, how WWE was still getting their asses kicked every week. You mean, they tried to talk about, oh, this was the creation of the Mr. McMahon character, and therefore, we got something special, and we know what we have in the palm of our hands. It's just that we haven't properly exploited it yet, because we're still getting our asses kicked by WCW. And it was weird because Trish Stratus is one of the commentators, and I don't know, like it's just weird hearing Trish Stratus curse. And I mean, we're all adults in the end of the day, but hearing Trish say fuck is just so weird. I mean, they're all cursing inside this. Every last one of them got a fucking potty mouth. But like, it's just weird hearing Trish in particular say fuck. I don't know why. But they said that the Attitude Era started in their minds basically the night that Shawn Michaels came out. Somewhere, I think, like, I want to say right before SummerSlam. Either right before or right after SummerSlam in 97. Shawn Michaels came out in some biker shorts, right? Some black biker shorts. And like, he stuffed it. I mean, I guess the higher ups thought that Shawn stuffed his underwear with a sock. But in reality, Shawn said he grabbed some gauze, some wrapping gauze, and he just stuffed it in his biker shorts. And that's what he was using in order to show that he has a bulge. And then, he did the interview with JR when he would jump in his face and go, look at my dick. They're like, this is what started the Attitude Era in their minds, because that was a night where Vince McMahon wasn't there, and then he came back the next day, and then he reprimanded Shawn Michaels. He fined him like $10,000, but then eventually he came around and he was like, we need to be more like what Shawn is. He's got attitude, damn it. He's got attitude. And then they start to talk about Austin and how like ECW influenced the entire Attitude Era, and how Austin and his 316 promo was super duper over, which obviously it was over when it was all said and done. I mean, the Austin 316 shirt, I mean, pick your shirt. It's either the NWO shirt or it's the Austin 316 shirt. Those two merchandise is easily the highest selling merchandise in the history of professional wrestling. So it's not to say that the Austin 316 thing wasn't over. But it wasn't over at that very moment. You know what I mean? They keep telling this. I don't know why they keep doing this revisionist history bullshit where they'll tell you something along the lines of Austin was super duper over after the Austin 316 promo. The very next night, there were a bunch of signs. They ain't no motherfucking bunch of goddamn signs. No, the fuck it wasn't. All right? No, the fuck it wasn't. Honestly, to be fair, Austin 316, legitimately with the signs and all the bullshit going on, Austin 316 really didn't start getting over for real till like late 97. And I mean like late 90. I'm talking about like December of 97 is when Austin really started to catch on. You can say they were layering his character. You can say that they were giving him a background. But Austin didn't start catching on until late 97, and they keep making up this bullshit line saying Austin 316 is what initially got him over. No, the fuck it wasn't. It's one of the all-time great promos. Yes, maybe the all-time great promo. But no, it wasn't what actually did the job as far as getting Austin over. They keep saying that shit. And then Mike Tyson was brought in. And I like this right here. I heard the story beforehand too, where when they brought Mike Tyson in, they were trying. One of the agents were trying to get Eric Bischoff's attention, and they were telling him about WWE. Eric Bischoff wasn't paying it any mind. Eric looked at it like, okay, I don't really give a shit what they're doing at the moment. It's just another 83 weeks. I'm gonna kick their ass some more. He got super arrogant. He got super cocky, and he was content. He was super duper content when in reality, it was Mike Tyson that they were bringing in, and they told Eric Bischoff, well, you might want to know this bit of information. They're bringing in Mike Tyson, and that immediately shut Eric Bischoff the fuck up, which is great, man. I mean, I wish they would have went more in depth in the Hell in a Cell stuff, because I know Kevin Sullivan, when Taker and Foley had their Hell in a Cell, he was like, pack up the bags, folks. That's it. Ain't no topping that, no matter how hard we fucking try. So I wish they would have went more in depth in regards to that. But essentially after the whole Mike Tyson stuff, you got Austin and McMahon. They're doing their thing, obviously. And you got essentially the Attitude Era, full-blown Attitude Era that happened right after WrestleMania 14, right? And I know how Vince explains the background of the Mr. McMahon character. I love how he's trying to explain it, right? And in the midst of explaining it, you have this interviewer who's asking the wrestlers, how close is Mr. McMahon and the Vince McMahon character? And it varies so wildly. Like, you'll have Shane McMahon, which I expect no less, that's the man's son, to say something along the lines of, well, I mean, the Vince McMahon character and the Mr. McMahon character are completely separate. And then, like, you'll ask another wrestler, like, oh, how close is the Mr. McMahon character or the Vince McMahon character? And they'll go, slightly like him, but turned up to 10. And then the rest of the wrestlers will just say, nah, fuck that. No, the Mr. McMahon character was absolutely Vince McMahon all the goddamn way. Not turn up to 10. That's just fucking Vince, which I found fucking hilarious. Eric Bischoff, he made some interesting comments about Vince McMahon. Look, and I've always heard this before, and I'm just calling it interesting because I haven't heard it in a while, but to a lesser degree, I kind of agree. Eric Bischoff notates the fact that, well, I mean, you kind of have to think about it, you know, with DX sort of kind of being a derivative off the NWO, and even my character being somewhat, you know, grown, or I guess the Vince McMahon character grown out of my character, you can kind of say that Eric Bischoff, or this is what Eric Bischoff is saying, you can kind of say that Vince McMahon sort of kind of ripped me off. He just did it better. And Vince, as soon as it came back to him and they were like, oh, this is what Eric said, Vince was like, well, I mean, I did do it better. Like, he didn't even try to hide the ball that, I think I did take their stuff, or maybe inadvertently, or maybe it was on purpose. Like you said, he did it better, right? And, you know, Eric Bischoff was the first person to admit, like, yeah, they had us on the fence after this. I should have been more competent. I was too focused on the NWO when I should have been focused on making more characters, and I didn't do that. And to make matters much worse, they're already getting their asses kicked by this point, right? Now you get The Rock. Now you get The Rock, who's starting to hit his stride, and it's just like, God, it's like 1999. It's like a game of Monopoly, bro. When you think about the Monday Night War, like, imagine. So you guys know your color codes from Monopoly. Imagine all you got to your name, right, as let's just say, because you're WWE, right? So let's just say all you have is Park Place and Boardwalk. That's the dark blue places at the very, very tail end of the board, right before you land on go. It's the highest, most expensive places, and that's the only place you have. Whereas everybody else has everything else. They have the trains, they have the brown, they have the yellow, they have the red, they have the orange. But all you have is Park Place and Boardwalk. And they have every last single place, and they all have hotels and rooms and everything on their shits. And really all you have is like maybe a house or two on Park Place or Boardwalk. But someone lands on it, and you somehow, some way got around not landing on their places. And then someone else lands on your place again, and then you pass go, and then someone does it again. And then eventually they get kicked out of the game, and you get to own their places, and then you take your money, and then you buy their places, and then you do the same thing to the next person, and then you own their places, and then you put hotels on their places, and now it's down to you and another guy. And it's like, how the hell did this happen? This guy just had all these pieces. We had all these pieces on this board, and all he has is Park Place and Boardwalk. Now he damn near owns the entire board thanks to Park Place and Boardwalk. Yeah, that's essentially what Rock and Austin was with the Monday Night War. Yeah, all Vince had was Park Place and Boardwalk, but essentially that's all he really needed was Park Place and Boardwalk in order to save himself from losing the game. And then we have the ending of the video, which is pretty damn sad. I was wondering if they were going to talk about this, but they talk about the Owen Hart situation, and like the Montreal Screwjob, we talked about this plenty of times in the past, but the whole situation with Owen Hart, as mentioned plenty of times in the past, Owen was on the roof of, this is in Kansas City, right? If I'm not mistaken. Alright, it could have been another city. I'm super tired right now, so I'm not thinking straight, but Owen fell from the ceiling, right? I think it was 70 feet, so I can correct me if I'm wrong, out of the sky. And it was a darkened arena, so no one can see what actually happened. But Owen ended up taking, because the harness was defective, and Owen ended up taking, essentially, I don't want to say it like that, I don't want to relate wrestling to a real life situation, but just to illustrate it, he took a chest bump on the turnbuckle from the sky, which obviously broke multiple bones in his body, caved in his chest, and caused internal bleeding. Owen ended up dying backstage. Again, we've been hearing this story for over 25 years now. Never gets any easier, right? But Vince's thought process, according to him, was he just thought from a business perspective, if you bought a show and you're not aware of what's happening backstage, then okay, the show must go on. That's how he looks at it. And you can actually see Owen's, and this is the more, and I never really paid attention, and maybe I could be wrong, maybe that's not his, but tell me why Undertaker and The Rock are having that match at the King of the Ring, and in the edge of the ring you can see a splatter of blood. I don't know, there's just something really, disturbing about that, knowing that you can see a splatter of Owen's blood right there in the corner of the ring. I don't know, I just find that to be just morbid as fuck. Nevertheless, Brett actually says this is one of the, and by the way, this, in my opinion, is one of the craziest lines I've seen in the documentary so far. This is batshit insane. Bret Hart said he thinks they murdered Owen to get back at him. I had to yawn, but let that sink in for a second. Bret Hart thinks the WWE wanted to get back at him by murdering Owen Hart. Does that make sense to anybody? Anybody with half a fucking brain, does that make any sense? And I get it, Bret might be distraught still because, his brother is no longer with him. It's been 25 years. At that point in time, maybe 24 years. But to say something that egregious, that disgusting, I don't know, your head has to be somewhere up your own ass to not see outside of the fucking body to notice how fucking stupid that sounded. it sounds as stupid as what I'm saying right now. I am so goddamn tired, folks. Again, almost 24 hours. And they ended up the episode by pretty much talking about Martha Hart settling her lawsuit in 2000, and then WWE recuperating those funds by suing the people who made the manufacturing mistake when Owen passed away. Which is weird, because I did hear something along the lines of like, oh, the guy who did the harness, or the company, it was never meant to carry a human or something like that. And the company, I don't know how the company didn't distance themselves, right? Like, I mean, one of your employees made a stupid fucking decision. So then again, I guess that's how it works. Again, I'm just so tired. I'm not thinking straight. That sounded really stupid coming out of my mouth. But nevertheless, though, we got to keep pushing, folks. We're going towards episode 5. We're almost done with this shit. Let's continue on and be done with this shit, shall we? We shall. Oh, wait, I should get my thoughts. Yeah, this episode, again, just like the last episode, just like the first episode, we've seen it plenty of times before in the past. Seen it way too many times. I've heard way too many of the same stories. Not one thing in this episode did I learn something new. It's something that I've been hearing over wrestling lore or over 25 years. So yeah, hopefully we can get some new information, please, like we did sort of kind of in the second episode. The first episode, the third episode, and the fourth episode, they're really fucking dry. Seriously, they're really fucking dry. Again, hopefully they can up that up going into this episode right here. But only one way to find out, and that's to watch the episode in itself. So if you don't mind, now let's continue. Okay, I'm dying. I'm dying. Okay, come on, Devontae. You made it this far. You got one more episode after this. Let's just get this over with. Fuck, this is torture. Oh, the only good thing about this is I don't have to worry about this no more later on today. Okay, so, all right, so we kicked this off with Vince McMahon basically implying that his mother raped him. Yeah, that's where we're going right now. That's where we're going. See, I've seen the crime scene photos and everything. You know, let's get to that a little bit later on, because I do want to touch on that, but let's keep going. So Steph became a character after leaving college. Apparently the Test storyline, okay, they tell the whole story. So they're now introducing all the McMahon siblings, right? All the McMahon family members, including Triple H, right? And they're touching on the fact that Stephanie McMahon became a character after she left college, right? That was the whole deal as to how she got into the business. And apparently, because beforehand, I think she was like marketing t-shirts or merchandise or some shit like that. Apparently that Test storyline, by the way, you know, the whole little marriage storyline with Stephanie and Test after SummerSlam, the lover or leaver stuff. Apparently it had no ending to it. And they were trying to figure out how the hell can they end the storyline. It's going on forever. They wanted to end it a couple of months prior to this, believe it or not, but they had no way of figuring out how the fuck to end it. And comes Triple H, who suggests that he could be the one to marry Stephanie McMahon. I love how he's like, yeah, I'm gonna take Test's storyline, and also on top of that, Test is never gonna get a money match with me because he's a bitch. That's essentially what Triple H is saying, right? All in all. Remember, Test never got that one-on-one championship match with him, or that one-on-one pay-per-view match, or nothing along the lines of that. As a matter of fact, maybe he faced off with Test in late 99. I don't remember. If he didn't, the next time I remember Test and Triple H was probably like that following year in September, when Triple H was like a baby face for like a couple of weeks before he turned on Austin. But nevertheless, though, Shane was actually really against them dating, right? So like after the whole, as we know, I talked about this yesterday in my China video, after the whole shit with Triple H and Stephanie McMahon hitting it off, they became an item. For real. They were in love with each other. And Shane was vehemently against all of this, and he was pretty much going to Vince and reminding him like, hey, I thought you said wrestlers couldn't date your daughter, because Shane was one of those big brothers who was very overprotective over Stephanie. And Vince told him, he's like, well, I'm a wrestler, so what's the big deal? And Shane is like, cause you're a fucking hypocrite. But nevertheless, though, Vince tried to So this is what they said. They said Vince actually had the audacity to try to book Stephanie and Triple H's wedding on pay-per-view. And Stephanie was like, no! And Vince, in his demented fucking mind, thought to himself, oh, you don't want to have your wedding on pay-per-view? Okay, fine then. We're gonna have a match on pay-per-view. And this fucking demented psychopath, you know the No Mercy match? Where, you know, what was it, the I Quit match with Stephanie and Vince? You know that happened like a week before her wedding? And Stephanie thinks this is a punishment because he turned down her advances of, or I guess she turned down his advances of wanting to air her most private moments on pay-per-view. Vince, dude, he's such a sick man, bro. But they talk about Linda and Vince also, and how Linda never wanted to be on TV. She said she was shy. She said she didn't know how to play the character all too well. And believe it or not, when Trish and Vince were doing the whole little the storyline with, you know, Vince and Trish making out in front of Linda, and she's like in that catatonic state and shit like that, apparently Linda was okay with it. As a matter of fact, there was some things that Trish were doing to Linda, like for an example, kissing her on the forehead while she was like in that trance-like state. That was Linda McMahon's idea for Trish to do that. So everybody was on board except for Shane McMahon, who he kind of thought to himself, like, there's something about this that just feels really wrong, and I kind of don't like it. And then Vince, because he's like the king of gaslighting on this entire fucking show, he's like telling Shane McMahon, dude, we're all characters, okay? Just let me fuck Trish Stratus. I just want to make out with Trish. I just want to touch her body. I want her to grab my ass in front of your mom. It's a character. It's a story. When I'm deep inside her pussy and you're looking directly at me, understand that this is all just a storyline. It is just a storyline. It's essentially what he's saying. And then we finally get to one of the more controversial angles, which I didn't think was, I mean, maybe it's just me, maybe because I'm just older. Am I the only one at the time when this was occurring? I never really thought much of it. I mean, people look at it now and they're like, oh, this is the worst segment of all time. It demeans women and all this shit. I don't know. I feel like I've seen so much worse during the Attitude Era that even, because I've seen this in real time, like, obviously. I don't know. I just never really thought it was that big of a deal, but apparently people think it's a big deal with Trish barking like a dog. Dave Meltzer, because he's, like I said, being interviewed on this, he explains this in the most psychopathic, sociopathic manner in regards to how men look at the Trish Stratus and Vince McMahon barking like a dog angle. This crazy bastard said men love looking at women naked, and also they hate them because they can't be with them. Essentially calling all of us incels who like the angle because we like seeing women naked and we want to see their bloody bodies in bikinis or some fucking crazy shit like that because Dave Meltzer's a projecting fag. Ooh, almost slipped. He's a projecting maggot with an F in front of it. There we go. Fuck it. Brace, I'm really tired right now. They talk about the Shane and Vince McMahon match at WrestleMania 17. And, you know, while they're in the process of talking this, right, because they're trying to give off, you know, what Shane was trying to go through in his mind when watching this. So, like, he explains his story where apparently he's like, when he was a kid, he was like wrestling his dad, play fighting, right? And I guess Shane was somewhat getting the better of him a little bit. And Vince decided to dig his fingernails in the side of his son's ribs and then clench onto his skin and then dig his fingers into his ribs, which made Shane let go, and then he grabbed him by the hair to take him down. Shane stands up and he's like, Dad, what the fuck? You cheated. Like, what the fuck was that all about? And Vince is just like, I won. That's what the fuck it's all about. I'm like, this man, he's such a demented human being, bro. But speaking of demented, it gets even worse. This whole episode is just, this is the episode that I wanted to see in regards to how fucking insane Vince McMahon is. They talk about Sable suing WWE for $110 million, right? She was alleged of sexual harassment back in like 1999, right? They bring her back to the company. And I shit you not, I do not remember the storyline at all. I remember Sable and Vince being a thing. Don't get it twisted. I remember Sable, Vince, Zach Gowen, Brock Lesnar, Big Show, Stephanie, all that shit. A-Train. I remember all that shit. What I don't remember is Stephanie flat out looking at Vince and saying, this lady sued us for $110 million over a sexual harassment, and you're doing it again. I do not remember that storyline at all, but good God, these people, bro. These fucking people. So, and then also, they start talking about his activities in Playboy to coincide with all the stuff that he was being accused by Sable, just to kind of play up all the stuff with Linda McMahon. And there's a few quotes inside Playboy magazine with him talking about having fun with the Playboy girls, and it's just like, dude. And I love how, I think it was Paul Heyman who was like, the only love in Vince McMahon's life is the wrestling business. He doesn't have time for, he's essentially saying he doesn't have time for skeezers and weirdos. But Vince goes public and he opens up Times Square, right? Now he's on the stock market, he's on the New York Time Exchange, all that shit, right? They talk about WCW's demise and Turner Broadcasting, AOL, and the Time Warner merger, and it cost Vince $2.5 million in order to buy WCW. That's and also a part of the deal. I never knew this. This is actually kind of new. I mean, I guess we should have known this, but I didn't know this, even though it's kind of common sense. But I guess a part of that deal was allowing him, because you know how WCW on TNT, they were like, oh, you know, the main reason why they didn't want to buy the library, Eric Bischoff, that is, because he didn't have anywhere to air it, because TNT just did not want anything to do with the with professional wrestling. But Vince said that he wanted to air WCW one last time in the simulcast as a part of the deal, which obviously he got to do because we remember the scenes. And just to do another Monopoly analogy that I talked about earlier, this is now Vince McMahon starting off with Boardwalk and Park Place only, right? Getting lucky, getting only one house on each of them, right? And now he owns the entire fucking board. Think about that for a second. Thinking about having only Boardwalk and Park Place and all your opponents have something on the board as far as sets, and they each have hotels, right? They each have houses, and all you have is that one house on Boardwalk while owning the dark blue. And then all of a sudden, you build it up enough where now you have two hotels and everybody's landing on it, and then you're taking their places and you're putting buildings on their places, and now all of a sudden you own the entire board. That's essentially what Vince McMahon did. On the brink of extinction, he fought back and he won, right? Too bad he didn't make any, good decisions after all that, because this is when he starts the XFL, where essentially he wanted to make the characters out of football players, and it was a failure as time went on because it was a goofy ass idea. And eventually, according to them, it eventually became, at the time, the lowest rated primetime show of all time. and you had the Bob Costas interview that they showed, right? And Vince is getting super frustrated with the questions that Bob Costas is asking. Was Bob Costas in Happy Gilmore? Was he in Happy Gilmore? Not Happy Gilmore, I'm sorry. Billy Madison, excuse me. Was he in Billy Madison? He reminds me of the guy when he's talking to Vince McMahon, and he reminds me of the guy who's like, that answer is wrong. In fact, I have cancer for how wrong you are. Everybody in this room is stupider from hearing you talk. I bust out every time I fucking hear it. Every time I hear that, I bust out laughing. Bob Costas interviewing Vince McMahon kind of reminded me of that. This is the worst show of all time. Why did you do this? And Vince is getting super pissed. He's like, this is the lowest rated show on prime time. Bro, he is grilling the shit out of Vince, bro. I was busting out laughing. Vince wanted to fight this man over the shit he was saying. Oh shit, bro! I gotta check out that interview when the time comes. But afterwards, eventually they move on. Oh, that shit bust, man. Shit, bro. That shit is so funny. we get to the Panda people, the World Wildlife Fund. They sue the WWF over their name because they had the name first. And apparently, they didn't talk about it in the video, but they had some arrangements going even as far back as like the mid-90s, if I remember correctly, of them not using the WWF logo, but they still kept using the WWF logo. But like I said, you know, now they're more known by WWE. As a matter of fact, you want to hear something crazy? You guys want to hear something crazy? They became the WWF in what, like 1980 or 1982? Around one of those 2 years, right? I think it was 82 though. 81, 82, or 80, one of those. You know that now, at this point, they've been known as WWE longer than they've been known as WWF? Fucking crazy, right? That's fucking insane. But they did that, and now WWE is what they are right now, WWE. They talk about The Rock versus Hogan at WrestleMania X8. I mean, this one is kind of like, I feel like this was failure to a certain degree. Even when they talked about bringing in Eric Bischoff, these 2 points were essentially just trying to make up, you know, point out the fact that Vince McMahon can do business with literally anyone. That was the whole point behind that. He can do business with literally anyone. Talking about Hogan coming back and Bischoff essentially being brought in, and they talk about Austin taking his ball and going home, and you know, Rock follows suit when he had to go do his movies. Then they talk about Vince McMahon starting the Ruthless Aggression era with Austin being gone and Rock preparing to leave for the movies for good, right? And that's when they introduced John Cena, and Cena talks about, you know, the Ruthless Aggression stuff and how he became a rapper because Stephanie McMahon heard him in the bus rapping, and, you know, that pretty much saved his career because it looked like he was on the brink of getting released. And then something happened, and I wonder if they're going to talk about this in the next episode, but they mentioned Chris Benoit's name. Cena just outright blatantly mentioned Chris Benoit's name like it was nothing, just straight up. He was like, we have some good talent on the roster. We have this guy, we had this guy, we had this guy, we had Chris Benoit, we had this guy. We guys like, hang on now. Did you just say Benoit? I guess I should have expected this, but it still just caught me by surprise because he just said it so casually. It was so weird. So hopefully that's going to be the next thing we're going to hear on the next episode, because that's the final episode. They actually also went there with the pregnancy story. You're probably like, pregnancy story? Yeah, they went there with the pregnancy story. So Vince pitched the angle to Stephanie McMahon where she was pregnant, and he wanted it to be with Shane, and he wanted it to be, when she turned that down, he wanted it to be with him, which Stephanie thought was fucking repulsive. And she doesn't even want to talk about it because Vince is a sick fuck who needs help. He talked about incest in his family too. This man talked about his mom raping him, so you know, it wouldn't be too far-fetched for him to, you know what, let's just go to the next one. They talk about how Vince was also super tough on Shane and Stephanie, but in particular, they were talking about Shane McMahon. There's this crazy story. So first they talk about the whole UFC stuff when, you know, Vince had the opportunity to buy UFC because Shane was kind of like, you know, egging them on to buy it. Very reminiscent to how Vince was egging his dad to do stuff with Hulk Hogan. Shane was kind of doing it to Vince McMahon, full circle, to do it with the UFC, and Vince turned it down. He didn't feel like the business model was the same as their business model. And, you know, apparently Shane and Vince butted heads a few times over the company. And Vince gave him an ultimatum. He was like, you really want the company? Huh? You really want the company? And he gave him a knife. He was like, here, put that right here inside of my heart, because that's the only way you're getting this company. And if you can't do that, then you're not man enough to do that. And I have to take that into consideration. This man is fucking sick in the head, bro. He was like, or you can buy me out like I did my father. And, you know, he speak, I don't know about that dagger comment, but he's speaking facts in regards to his dad. He's like, if I have to do it, you have to do it. And he said something else that was kind of crazy also. He was like, and if my dad didn't let me buy him out, one way or another, I was going to take him out to get this company. Are you willing to do the same? Not verbatim, but that's essentially what he said. And then it immediately cut to an article saying Shane left the company in 2010. It was fucking hilarious. I bust out laughing right there too. But that was essentially it for this episode right here. This one is probably my favorite one so far. By far, bro. This is easily my favorite episode of this whole thing so far. This was fantastic. We got some stuff revealed. Now, some things I already knew, like the pregnancy storyline. But there are some things that I actually didn't know. Like, I didn't know about, like, you know, the whole situation with, what was it called again? The Sable stuff, for an example, on SmackDown. I knew nothing about that, honestly. I didn't know anything about Linda McMahon being okay with Stephanie McMahon doing what she did. I didn't know that Vince was being raped by his mother. Attitude! No, that's not attitude. Don't do that. No, none of that is attitude. But with that being said, we're gonna get ready to get to the next episode, the last episode. I'm finally almost done with this shit. I am so goddamn sleepy. It is 9:09. I've been doing this since 3 o'clock in the morning. Really 2 o'clock if you take into consideration the editing. It was pitch black dark outside, and now the sun is up. This is fucking insane, bro. But I gotta get it over with, man. I got one more episode to get done, and then get as much sleep as I fucking possibly want to get. I mean, I still have to upload the video, but we're almost there. Let's just get this done, okay? Let's go. All right, and that does it. All 6 episodes in one sitting. It only took damn near 8 hours to do. Felt like a damn full-time job. But I finished. And, quite apropos that this episode was called The Finish. This was damn sure the heaviest episode. I guess I'd expect no less, right? But they talked about a lot of stuff in this episode, man. And it's like they attempted to humanize Vince McMahon, but then they had to remind you that in the end of the day, he is still Vince McMahon. Does that make any sense? Let me say this again. They tried to humanize Vince McMahon, and then they reminded you that he was Vince McMahon. Say that in your head a couple times if you don't understand what I mean. So they kick off the episode talking about Donald Trump. They talk about Donald Trump and Vince's relationship. They talk about the stuff that happened at WrestleMania 23. And they essentially said that Donald Trump and Vince McMahon are a lot alike. I mean, they're good friends, so I'd expect no less. They even show some images from Donald Trump and his campaign stuff. A bunch of people who commented on this, you can clearly tell, are liberals. They're on the left, especially people from the journalistic side. And it was quite refreshing seeing them, because I know Dave Meltzer, for an example, is a staunch never-Trumper. He despises Donald Trump. But even he, within the wrestling context, was able to look at Donald Trump and appreciate what he's done for the business. Because he's done stuff for the business, believe it or not. Going all the way back to the 80s, coming up right now in 2007. Put aside my politics for a second, Donald Trump is a contributor to professional wrestling. And he's done way more for the business than your average celebrity. Bet your bottom dollar on that. But they use that as a segue to talk about all the stuff in regards to Vince McMahon and his limousine explosion. And it was a weird storyline when I was a kid, also seeing it. You know, I was like probably 15 at the time, trying to figure out what the hell is going on, because I thought it was real too for a second. And at that point in time, I was looking at dirt sheets and stuff. And even they got me. They worked Trump too, apparently. Apparently Trump called to see whether or not Vince McMahon was okay. I was confused. On one hand, I remember saying to myself that I know this is a work. And then, like, as time started to go on throughout the day, the next day, I'm like, was this a work? So they did a good job on the angle before the Benoit stuff happened. And that's a sore spot for me, obviously. I talked about the Benoit stuff over the past 5 or so years, so there's no need to get into the topic in itself. But, you know, that was the angle that pretty much exposed Vince for not being dead, actually, right? Then it goes a little bit deeper into the whole Chris Benoit situation. And it was quite ironic that Vince McMahon kept referring to Benoit, at least back then, as a monster who snapped. We'll get into that a little bit later if you don't know what I mean, which I'm pretty sure you know what I mean. But they brought in Christopher Nowinski. He was a part of Tough Enough crew back in 2001, I believe, or 2002. I know he was in WWE in 2002, so let's just say 01 to 02. And he unfortunately got a concussion in the Royal Rumble 2003 with Edge and Rey Mysterio trying to do a double missile dropkick. Shit happens. But he made it his duty, he made it his goal, his life's work, to try to bring awareness to CTE, concussions. And when the situation happened with Benoit, he asked his father if he can donate his brain so he can look at how his brain developed throughout the years to see if that was a contributor to what happened with Benoit and his untimely demise. And as proven, I don't think anyone would look, it's not really rocket science to know that Chris Benoit got a concussion, multiple concussions, and he was absolutely suffering through CTE related issues that he believes contributed the majority to his death. You leave it up to people like Christopher Nowinski. They said that Benoit had the brain of an 80-year-old man, and a lot of wrestlers were in denial. They were saying things like, oh, well, when I wrestle, I never got that many concussions. This was Austin talking, this was Taker talking, for an example. And they brought up a point where it was like, well, if you got this many concussions working, then you're not doing it right. You know what I mean? And considering that Benoit is a professional, they don't believe that that is in relation to Chris Benoit's death, when it clearly is. Benoit had horrible CTE. Just because you wrestle a certain way doesn't mean Benoit's way of wrestling circumvents the issues that happen to him personally. But I get what the wrestlers are saying. It's just that, well, the proof is right there. Christopher Nowinski proved all that already. The evidence is right there. But with that, Christopher Nowinski went on this whole tour to say that the wrestling moves in themselves were dangerous, which obviously put WWE in the limelight. And Vince McMahon took it upon himself to call up Christopher Nowinski and tell him, hey, you don't have to do all this. We'll help you with your research, okay? If you want to, give a couple of classes, tell us what we shouldn't or what we should do. We can add it within the wellness policy, all this other kind of stuff. And that's what Christopher Nowinski did. And in the process of doing that, that's how they got rid of chair shots, right? Maybe some other stuff too, but in particular chair shots, which Undertaker, he had a problem with because he thought to himself, well, this is how we tell our stories. The chair shot is one of the most important elements in professional wrestling. And just to take that away, I'm an old school guy. And I can see Taker's point. But at the same time, though, if this is actually occurring to this degree, I still think you should gimmick chairs. I think if a chair is a gimmick, it's just the visual anyways, right? In the end of the day, you don't have to hit someone with a real chair. As long as the chair in itself, when you get hit with it, does as little damage as humanly possible, I think it's fine to use a chair as long as you gimmick it. But, apparently Taker has an old school way of looking at things, right? Then they start to grill McMahon on all these deaths from these wrestlers. They're dying early. This guy's dying. And I forgot the guy's name. I didn't catch it. I tried to revert back, but every time I revert back, it always started over my Netflix video, so I just stopped rewinding. So unfortunately, I couldn't find the guy's name. But it's the interview when Vince McMahon is getting all erratic and he flips the pages out of the interviewer's hand. Well, that interview was grilling him really, really hard on the situation, and Vince didn't take too kindly to it. He didn't take too kindly to pretty much being accused of causing the deaths of multiple wrestlers. But, I'm not going to say it was Vince McMahon's fault, because like he said, they are their own They're responsible for their own selves. At the same time, though, it's not as if you can ignore, them doing certain things to their bodies in order to get more of a look from Vince McMahon. Again, it's not Vince's fault directly, but I guess you'd be pretty ridiculous to not say that it wasn't Vince's fault indirectly. Kind of like the steroid stuff. You can't charge him for it, but at the same time, though, it's not as if it wasn't an incentive to look like that guy who did do steroids. You know what I mean? Very similar situation. Then they get to the part where they start talking about Undertaker's streak, right? And this is more so related to the concussion issue, also stemming off of Benoit, because as you guys know, Taker got a concussion in that match with Brock Lesnar. And Vince he's trying to gaslight people still with the Undertaker's concussion, telling them like, oh, like the concussion that you got, it wasn't that big of a deal, talking like that. And it is weird. It's very weird. It comes off super weird, knowing the topic that you're discussing right now is in relation to your friend, and it kind of seems like you're trying to gaslight him so the onus doesn't go on you. I get it, but it does feel very manipulative how he's talking. Cody Rhodes is now interviewed, right? And he talks about how he came into professional wrestling on the main roster in 2007, and how he came in right after the Benoit tragedy, and the wellness policy just kicked in, right? And it was a clean slate. Not too long afterwards, they went PG also to make the image more cleaner and obviously to make more money. And then they involved the women's revolution into all this, pretty much just showing you the change in the atmosphere in regards to the backstage stuff that was going on after the stuff with Benoit, and how regulations were pretty much in use at the time during all this stuff. And then they talk about Shane McMahon coming back, right? Because they're trying their best. Look, I'll give this documentary credit for trying their best to humanize Vince McMahon, but we'll talk about that a little bit more towards the end, though. Shane McMahon comes back to the company in 2016, as we all know, and it's kind of doing this whole thing where it's like Vince, in the beginning of the entire documentary on episode 1, he states that all he wanted was his dad's approval. In particular, he wanted his dad's love. He wanted his dad's respect. And all he got was a pat on the back. Well, after Shane McMahon did his Hell in a Cell match with The Undertaker, they even reflected back on the stuff that he was doing in the King of the Ring in 2001, just to illustrate how much he really, really, really wanted Vince's respect. Not just the boys, but in particular Vince's respect. He finally got that. He got the thing that his dad didn't get, which was his respect. He got a hug. He got a pat on the back. He got everything that Vince did not get from his dad. It continues on. All the wrestlers, they start to talk about Vince and reflect on him as far as being a father figure. A lot of them were saying that Trish said it, John Cena said it, The Undertaker said it. He even got emotional when he said it. They eventually go back to Shane and Stephanie, and they start to compare the two, because the whole situation was, who do you see taking over WWE? And it's like all the wrestlers were saying like it's a difference between Shane and Stephanie. With Shane, he's nice. With Stephanie, she's more ruthless. She's more abrasive. Almost as if to say that Shane got his mom's personality and Stephanie got her dad's personality. That's at least how it came out to me. I love how they acknowledge AEW too when they reflected off of Cody Rhodes returning back to WWE. That was cool. Like, I didn't expect to see that. They absolutely shown AEW and the logos and everything and reflected off of Cody Rhodes coming back. That was very unexpected. I wasn't really expecting that. But they only used that as a segue to talk about, Vince McMahon retiring initially, right? They said, because they were playing this whole thing where it's like Vince McMahon was telling everybody he's never going to retire. He has no respect for people who quit. He has no respect for people who retire. What's the goal of life after you retire? What do you do afterwards? Die? Then go ahead and die. That's what Vince said, not me. And then they cut to Vince McMahon actually stepping down. Now, I have a link down in the description box below just to give a little bit of context for people who are new. I'm pretty sure most of you guys who watch the channel, you're very much aware of this whole entire situation. But going back in 2022, this is from ESPN, the board of World Wrestling Entertainment is investigating the secret $3 million settlement that company CEO Vince McMahon agreed to make to a former employee over an alleged affair, according to the Wall Street Journal report Wednesday. The separation agreement, which was signed in January, is meant to prevent the now former employee from discussing her relationship with McMahon or making disparaging comments about him, essentially an NDA, according to the Journal. An email sent to WWE board members March 30th indicates that the 76-year-old McMahon hired the former staffer, 41, on a $100,000 salary and then gave her a raise to $200,000 after the start of the alleged sexual relationship with her. The report, citing documents and the accounts of people familiar with the board inquiry, said the board's investigation began in April and has uncovered other non-disclosure agreements over the years involving misconduct claims from former employees against McMahon and John Laurinaitis, WWE's head of talent relations. The email sent to the board regarding the former WWE employee, who was hired as a paralegal in 2019, alleged that McMahon gave the woman to Laurinaitis, and I quote, like a toy. The board is investigating the email's allegations, the report stated. The Journal reported that the board has retained the law firm Simpson, Thacher, and Bartlett to conduct the investigation and that payments of other non-disclosure agreements, outside of the one involving the former employee, have totaled in the millions of dollars. An ESPN request for comment from WWE was not returned Wednesday night. The Journal reported that a WWE spokesman said the company is cooperating fully with the board investigation and that the relationship between the paralegal and McMahon was consensual. McMahon bought the then World Wrestling Federation from his father Vincent J. McMahon in 1982, and it goes on to talk about other things that is not relevant to what we're discussing right now, but that's essentially why Vince McMahon stepped down back in 2022. As noted in the article, he said that he was going to step aside regarding the investigation. At this point in the documentary, Vince no longer gives any more interviews. That's it. He comes back one more time to talk about his legacy towards the end, but going forward, in relation to the conversation right here in 2022 going forward, he does not give any more interviews. They talk about the tennis salon groping situation in 2006, which Vince McMahon, for some ungodly reason, made a storyline out of this. Not necessarily a storyline, but a skit backstage, which I have no recollection of, but apparently that happened. He also agreed to pay $12 million to a bunch of women for misconduct, the worst being the $7.5 million settlement that he gave to Rita Chatterton. Then Vince retires, for real. Stephanie gets a bunch of people. This is when Vince sends out the tweet back in 2022 saying that at 77 years old, it's time for me to retire. Stephanie, shows up on SmackDown and she gives this whole rah-rah speech about people thanking Vince McMahon. They cut to Hulk Hogan and asks whether or not the business can operate without Vince. Mind you, this is around the time. All these interviews are done around that time. And Hogan states that no, he doesn't believe that the business can operate without Vince McMahon. Vince does return back in 2023. Stephanie resigns. And this is all based off of the fact that Vince McMahon had the majority of votes. And you have Bruce Pritchard, who's coping like a motherfucker, stating that all the misconduct and all the misdeeds said about Vince McMahon is a bunch of bullshit. More so reflecting off of one of the guys who was one of the journalists, I forgot his first name, but his last name is Shoemaker, and Dave Meltzer, calling and saying all the things that they're reporting on is a bunch of bullshit and lies. Obviously, this was at the time in 2022, if I'm not mistaken, 2022, 2023. Obviously, at this point, it's been proven correct because Vince paid a settlement to all those people. And then Endeavor buys WWE and UFC for $21 billion. This is when Vince is still in charge last year. Bruce Pritchard does come back in, I think, early 2024 to bury the documentary. He said he's seen parts of it and he disagrees with a large majority of it. Even outright said that it sucked. He said he hates the fact that the way the documentary paints Vince McMahon out, they make him seem like one of the worst people in the world, when in reality, he's incredibly charitable. He talks about the time how Vince McMahon covered his wife's cancer bills. And apparently she had the life expectancy of 4 years, and that was 24 years ago, and that was all thanks to Vince McMahon. And then it cuts to the whole situation in regards to the sex trafficking charge. And we know all about this, but just to catch people up, this was broken by a lady named Khadijah Safir. And apparently this states, and I'm going to read the article for you guys just to kind of catch you up if you're not aware. This was last year, or I guess this year, but back in February. Vince McMahon has resigned from his role as executive chairman of TKO, the parent company of WWE, following disturbing allegations of sexual assault, trafficking, and physical abuse. The allegations came to light in a lawsuit filed by a former WWE staffer, Janel Grant, who worked at the headquarters of the wrestling behemoth McMahon founded. McMahon has denied the allegations and said he is prepared to defend himself in court, but in a statement Friday, McMahon said that he has resigned, and I quote, "Out of respect for the WWE Universe, the extraordinary TKO business, and its board members and shareholders, partners and constituents, and all the employees and superstars who helped make WWE into the global leader it is today, I have decided to resign from my executive chairmanship and the TKO board of directors effective immediately," McMahon said in a statement. Reports that McMahon had paid out settlements to multiple women while serving as WWE CEO and chairman have been circulating since at least 2022, by the lawsuit filed by Grant Thursday, sheds new light on the extent of McMahon's alleged misconduct. In the lawsuit, Grant alleged that McMahon dangled a job offer at WWE and later promotions in exchange for sex. Grant's lawsuit also alleges that McMahon trafficked her to other men inside and outside the company, including John Laurinaitis, who worked in the company's talent relations department and is also named as a defendant in the suit. McMahon, in acts of extreme cruelty and degradation toward Grant during her time in WWE, the lawsuit alleges. TKO, in an email to staff and in a statement to the press, addressed only McMahon's job status with the company, but did not discuss the specifics of the allegations. In an email to staff Friday obtained by CNN, WWE President Nick Khan said simply that McMahon tendered his resignation from his executive chairmanship and board member positions. And a quote from Nick Khan, "He will no longer have a role with TKO Group Holdings or WWE." On Thursday, after Grant's allegations were made public in a lawsuit, the company said McMahon does not control TKO or oversee day-to-day operations at WWE. McMahon's exit marks another turning point for the wrestling entertainment company he created more than 40 years ago. And it goes on to talk more about other stuff in regards to the allegations in itself. You can look at the article because I don't want this video to be any longer than what it is. But essentially, just to kind of give you the TLDR, this is alleged now. He passed her around to different men, one including Brock Lesnar, allegedly. Khadijah, the person who reported on this, outright said it in the documentary in itself. Brock has never given a comment about this, by the way, just saying. And apparently she was doing a bunch of sexual deeds for Vince, including defecating on her head, and just other disparaging things. Again, all this is alleged, but that's what essentially they're talking about in regards to the sexual misconduct. They also further go on to talk about Ashley Massaro, which if you guys want more context about that, I just did a video on that yesterday in preparation for this video right here. And they start to talk about how the company was going to go forward without Vince McMahon. It finally ends with them asking the wrestlers about the legacy of Vince McMahon. All of them, for the most part, are kind of, I don't want to say confused, I don't think that's the right word, but they're like lost for words, because none of them outside of Tony Atlas can give you a legitimate explanation in regards to Vince McMahon's legacy. But Tony Atlas, and I think this is the appropriate way to put it, just said straight up, he's a bad person, and he's still one of the greatest, if not the greatest wrestling promoter of all time. No, he is. There's not one of. He is the greatest wrestling promoter of all time. And it ends with talking to Vince McMahon and asking him about his legacy. And Vince says that he doesn't have a legacy. And then it goes on to talk about the updates in regards to Janel Grant's situation, and talks about Brock Lesnar no longer leaving a comment. And that was it for the documentary. Just to give my own points about this, because, this video has gone long enough. I thought the documentary series as a whole, all 6 parts, didn't really give you any new information that you don't already know. Maybe some tidbits here and there, but overall, I will say that 95% of the information you're most likely going to know about Vince McMahon if you've been a wrestling fan long enough. I feel like for the average wrestling fan, or more in particular, for the average casual viewer, for a person who doesn't watch professional wrestling, they will look at this documentary and they will probably have obviously conflicting emotions in regards to it. Because, with Vince, we're kind of numb to it as wrestling fans because we've been seeing it for almost 30 years now, probably longer than that. But I can see why an average person who doesn't watch professional wrestling, very similar to Dark Side of the Ring, will look at Vince McMahon and look at this docuseries and say to themselves that they find this shit to be deplorable, that they find all this to be horrific. And like I said, they did their very best to paint out Vince McMahon as trying to humanize him as humanly possible. I'll say this. Vince McMahon had a troubled youth, a horrible upbringing. He didn't know his father. He didn't get to know his father until he was way too old. And at that point, it is what it is. He implies that his mom raped him. He got beat by his stepfather repeatedly. His stepfather beat his mom repeatedly. And that fucks with the psyche of a child. And then you get to the point when you get super rich and, you look at the Diddy situation for an example. You get that rich, you don't know what to do with yourself. And this is not making any excuses for Vince McMahon. It's just to tell you how I look at this psychologically speaking. For everything that is said about Vince McMahon, if I had to describe Vince over the years of watching professional wrestling and looking at news articles and this and that, he's disgusting. He's a piece of shit. He's troubled. And he's charitable. But one thing that you can take away from Vince McMahon, he is by far the most important person in the history of professional wrestling, and it's not even close. He is the reason why I'm even here talking to you guys. He's here. His contributions is why you're even listening to me talk right now. There are a bunch of things, bunch of negative. Don't know too much about the positives. That's more so people who he's probably close to. Things you could say about Vince McMahon. And I'll end it with this. All I can say is, whatever he's done, I can separate the person. I can separate the evil villain. I can separate the deplorable human being from the guy that made me and gave me everything that I need in order to get through life a lot easier throughout my entire 32 years of living. There's a bunch of times in my own personal life where I had a bunch of struggles, where I can say that professional wrestling, in particular WWE, got me through a bunch of troubling times. And for that, I have to thank Vince McMahon. But that doesn't take away from any of the misdeeds, the misconduct, the allegations, or the actions. There's a difference, and there's a separation that you have to make. They talk about turning it up to 10, but in the end of the day, there is a clear separation. There's Mr. McMahon, and there's Vince McMahon. There's the man, and there's the promoter. I personally would like to remember him more as the promoter than the man. As always, my name is Devontae, and I'll be catching you guys later. Deuces, P. Ice.